Hello, and welcome to my 13 horrifically silly days of Halloween. I'm Reagan McCauley, and today I have with me author Jen Frankel, genre author Jen Frankel. Jen, hi, it's so great to see you. Please tell us all a little bit about yourself.
Oh, this is exciting. It is so good to see you, meet you properly in person. We've corresponded, but not actually. I think I've only seen still pictures of you to this point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I might have seen a stream of you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there you
exactly.
go. There you
Yeah,
go. Welcome to the modern world.
yeah.
I am a genre author. I
Mhm.
love writing horror. I love writing science fiction and fantasy, but I love bending those things. So I like to have a little bit of horror and a little bit of fantasy and a little bit of sci-fi and a little bit of things that you really can't define because we're mashing them up. Or I'm sure people have defined them, but it's more fun to just say spec fiction and let the label just allow you to do anything you damn well feel like.
Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. So, all right. Well, you've been writing for a long time. Tell me more about your background.
Cool. I've been writing since I was a kid. I figured out pretty early on that all the useless knowledge I had in my head was going to need to go somewhere eventually, and there's only so much Trivial Pursuit you can play. So when I started developing a need for more friends, I used to do these things called imagination games with a friend of mine from public school. So we would go to the local schoolyard and play for just hours, and we'd take on characters. I think we usually started with things that we'd read. So I remember Dragon Riders of Pern being a big one, and we were both so we played actually the characters from that, and we swung on the trapeze and the rings, and those were our dragons, and that was one of the first kinds of storytelling I learned, so that it was very collaborative. It was very much realizing that it's not just me driving the story. So it's not just my character that's important. There's other characters too. And I've continued to try to give all of my characters equally important motivations so that I don't end up feeling like I've fallen so in love with my one character that nobody else feels real. So I think that was like when I was, 11, 12, maybe even a little or earlier. It was, what do we called it? Like house, now it would be house on steroids, but it was like playing house, but,
Yeah.
but like to the next level. And we would act things out. We would dress up. I had a big box of dress up clothes in my parents' basement until way after they wanted to give them house room. And then a little longer. So I actually don't even know what happened to him, because like now I'm in a position where I would go, okay, I've actually got room for that tickle trunk now. I'm just,
Yeah.
oh, they're gone. Okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense because it's been decades. So I always loved writing in school. I always wrote things that perplexed my teachers. Every now and then I'd get a teacher who really liked what I was doing, but I would, one of my very first pieces that got some recognition was for a competition, a playwriting competition. And it was a loosely disguised allegory on nuclear arms proliferation with a bunch of kids in a playground who were vying for the perfect slingshot. And even that had an element of horror that was actually a little strong for not for the kids, but for my teachers, because there was a demon in it from Down Under, who was the one who brought them the plans for the perfect slingshot and caused all this chaos with all the kids. And I was lucky enough to have it performed a couple of times. And that was honestly, like, that was one of the things that really gave me the bug. I also had a teacher in high school who made part of our assignment that we had to submit our writing to a publication or a competition.
Very
and it's kind of funny to reflect on that now, because the competition I chose was L. Ron Hubbard's Writers of the Future competition. So my one brush with Scientology is that I was a quarterfinalist in the L. Ron Hubbard Writers of the Future competition.
well done. I just wanted to say that your background reminds me very, very much of my background. I've been writing ever since I was 6 years old, but those imagination games, house on steroids. Yep, every recess and lunch hour with my friends, but I would be directing them. it was always understood that I was the director, and which was the early path for me to theater and then film, and which are other forms of storytelling, as you were saying. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and so that's why I do those three things as
Yeah,
along with some other stuff too. But
exactly.
yeah, it's very cool to find that out about you.
Well, I don't know if you're the same with me in this, but one of the reasons I had trouble as an actor, I think, is that I liked to be able to know what the whole dynamic was, and just following my own character's path was a little disorienting. Like
Mhm.
I sometimes I just wanted to be above the whole thing and putting the words into everybody's mouths instead of, only getting my own. I was just there was
Yeah,
that element of the string puller that I wasn't getting out of acting.
yeah, no, I definitely prefer directing and writing. So to be the puppet master, basically, and rather than, if I do acting, it's basically in my own stuff that I'm
Right.
already a puppet master for anyway. So
Again, very similar.
yeah.
I did a lot of one-woman shows because and then found out afterwards that those are supposed to be harder than doing shows with people, but it was much more natural for me to just get up there and do my own stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's something I have never done, but and not sure I ever will, but I get that. I totally
I
get
can see you doing maybe a show with a parrot or a spider monkey or
that. Yeah, or I bring a kiwi from New Zealand and just sort of like bounce
yeah.
off of that. I wish, but
Or you could be a very talented puppeteer.
yeah, yeah. That would be better. Yeah. Better for the kiwi. Anyway,
Yes.
moving back to you,
Oh yeah.
tell me about each of your books in turn, and basically like a synopsis and where they can be purchased, and any background stories, anything you want to tell me about them, basically.
Oh,
Go.
fabulous. Okay, this is like, oh my God, she didn't really ask me to do that, did she? Very first book took me 20 years to write.
Ooh.
I had a dream when I was 13 that really got into my head. And when I was 16, I deliberately gave myself 2 classes at high school, and the rest of the day was lunch or free periods. So I spent 6 months actually just writing my book,
Cool.
and trying to hide the fact from everybody that I was living with, because it just felt like, um, it felt like it needed to be something that I didn't share at that point. And I couldn't really work when anybody else was in the house. So I was grabbing as much time as I could. But I finished like maybe a third of the book then. And of course, because I was that age, I started writing the sequel before I'd even, gotten out of the first half of the first book. So I still have the longhand
Cool.
version. But so my very first book, The Last Rite, it's a supernatural thriller about a young woman, Maggie Stewart, who's 13. Wow, like just the age I was when I dreamed about that. And she starts to develop supernatural powers, as you do in books at that age.
Yeah.
And what she finds is that her powers are a rarity. That in my world, it's magic is extremely rare, and it's pretty much hidden from most people. But there's a whole kind of underground world that's just below the surface of ours. And one of the kings of it has had his power waning for the last few centuries after the death of his wife. And he's got a pair of children that are big problems. One of them who wants to follow in his footsteps, but is not his favorite. And the other one who doesn't want to follow in his footsteps and is actually interested in seeking something outside of their world. And into this comes Maggie, who actually, because of her powers, is kind of his future, because he needs her, but is also upsetting the power balance.
Okay.
So one of the things that I wanted to deal with from it, I didn't understand this at first, but all of the supernatural themes in my book are usually related to real psychology in our tradition, in our world, in the real world. So Maggie is very introverted. She's been disappointed by people, and she feels like everyone's going to leave her all the time. So that actually drives the climax of the book. The very fact that she's afraid of her own powers is also something that drives the book, that she actually has to overcome her fear of herself more than her fear of even the situation she's in.
Very cool.
So that's the first book. And it was always planned to be a series. I think at one point it might have been a 3-book series, but then it expanded to being a 4-book series. And the idea was that I would age her up significantly between books so that I could actually do her whole life, instead of, I just always felt bad when you have this character you really love who's in a YA fiction, and then you never really find out what happens to them later on.
Yeah.
And it feels like a cheat. Like there's more difficult things happening later on, and I wasn't sure how to reconcile it. And I actually tried to get it published in traditional publishers. I sent out a lot of query letters, and the response I got pretty much all the time was, we're not even going to look at it, or we like it, but it's 2 marketing departments, so you can't do it. You can't cross that divide between YA and adult fiction. We've got rules for one, rules for the other. You can't do it. We just don't have a place for it. I'm really loving that the concept of marketing fiction has expanded, so that we're seeing more. But there's still so many traditional stereotypes of what a book should be, that it's hard to do anything that steps outside of that, even if in other way you're doing something that's perfectly recognizable and traditional, characters, plot, chapters. But so the first book is her at 13. The second book is called The Red Ring, and it is Maggie at 16 at high school, and she's still really suffering from the outcome of the first book. So I also wanted to deal with long-term trauma. So she's going through a lot of teenage angst in this book. And some people, the nice thing is that some of my readers really relate to it, and the ones who don't enjoy the books at all. But the ones who do, they kind of need that. They need that character. They need the character that's that knows she's got something to offer, but nobody wants it.
Yeah.
Again, something that So the second book takes her to that, and then the third, I've been writing the third, but very, very slowly.
Okay.
Not as slowly, I think, as the first one. So the first one I actually did a third of it at 16, 2/3 of it in a small cabin in Nova Scotia in a month.
Wow.
And then even then it took me another 8 years to get it published.
Yeah.
But the third book I decided to do as a series of smaller chapbooks.
Oh,
so
cool.
I've got the first 2 out. The third one's going to be called Heaven and Hell. So the books are Living Large in Purgatory, A Heaven of Fallen Angels, The Hell, what is it called? A Hell of Our Own Making, and Falling to Earth We Fly.
Cool.
So they're dealing with Maggie at the age of 23, and she's drinking heavily to not think about the fact that she can't do magic. And I've been actually bringing this to my writers group, and one of the comments I've been getting is that for the fact that it's a book about magic, there's not a lot of magic in it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about magic, but there's a lot of frustration because she's trying to do magic and can't. It's something that she's lost, and it's but it's the itch she can't scratch. And I don't know if you've had this with even with acting. It's like I keep coming back to it because I can't quite get it out of my system. I can't quite get theater out of my system. I can't quite get film out of my system.
Yeah.
Every now and then I just need to dig in and have another experience and do something.
Yeah.
That's the way she is. I did a convention, did Montreal Comic Con, which is, have you been to? It's
not to Montreal, no.
The convention center is absolutely magnificent. There's there's shops and restaurants in the same building. It's accessible. It's everything that the Toronto Convention Center isn't, and I really wish the Toronto Convention Center was better laid out and just
Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it?
Montreal is wonderful. So I decided I would do a book in French and English so that I had something while I was there. So the French version is Intouchable, untouchable in English.
Nice.
And I actually tell the story in prose, and yeah, so tell it in prose. And then I also have the comic version that I did.
Nice.
So, yeah, just make sure I don't show the, some of it gets a little racy, so I'll show you the wrong pages. Yes. Yeah, so this was
cool.
yeah, so that was yeah, it was fun to do that. And I
Nice.
hired a friend of mine who does translation for a living, and he did a beautiful translation for me.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Really
Nice to
fun.
hear you that you have something in en français too. So
Well, and now I'm on Duolingo, so I'm trying to get my French brushed up so that I feel like I don't think I took French for how long, and I don't feel like I've ever gone to the point where I'm fluent. So
no, me too. Me too. Right through to grade 13, I took French. Yeah. Yeah. And
it's kind of embarrassing.
well, if you don't use it like any muscle, it just like it atrophies.
I feel like I never really felt like I was conversing. Like I feel like I can read French to some extent, but that in terms of actually using it,
exactly. Yeah, no, that needs practice, actual real world application, and that involves throwing yourself right in.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
anyway.
Actually, Maggie starts off in the third book in Montreal. And much the same experience that I had in Montreal. She speaks much better French when she's slightly drunk or very drunk. So the only way she can keep a job is actually by going to work slightly drunk.
Interesting.
She just doesn't have enough French otherwise to have a job in Quebec, which was my problem. I would have stayed in Quebec longer if I'd been able to work more easily.
Gotcha.
Really embarrassing. But you know, anything that's embarrassing in your life, you give to your characters, right?
Right. Absolutely. That's how you deal with it. That's how you process it. Yeah.
I wrote a YA science fiction called, I just have to keep holding it up on the side that doesn't reflect too badly.
Right.
It's called Lay of Earth. And it was an idea I had when I was a kid. It actually came out of a set of very cool space-themed paper dolls that I had. I actually managed to track the dolls down again, and I printed them out on my computer.
Oh, nice.
I have my dress-up dolls that are kind of slightly related to this, but I don't know if you can see. This is this is the princess from another planet, and crashes on Earth in Leia's backyard, and she lives on a farm outside of Warsaw, Ontario, which is somewhere near Peterborough. Small place. And Leia ends up going on an adventure with her to Mars to rescue her father and her fiance, who've been kidnapped by her stepmother.
Okay,
so it's got a very fairy tale aspect to it. Yeah,
totally.
And I had so much fun with it, and my picture of Lyra, the princess, was always that she would resemble more closely a Black woman instead of a white woman, like normal. That was always kind of my, without making like any real big deal out of it. So I've always drawn her that way when I've drawn pictures of her, and just wanted to kind of make sure that it was always just something that was like part of the story. So I don't know if you can see that, but that was the illustration of the two of them.
Nice.
Yeah, because I think I love what N.K. Jemisin is doing. The N.K. Jemisin, who writes these wonderful science fiction books that weave in race relations, and like just do this incredible allegory on history of humankind in our world. But I feel like for me, I need to write things that show the diversity of my world, and deal with the issues in it, but also just present it as being normal, so that I'm not, I always feel like a lot of the stuff that has female characters in it is made to be, oh, look, it's a woman, but she's doing all these things, instead of women already do all these things. Like,
Yeah. Well, that's not unusual. You know?
Sometimes I just like to write, about diversity as not a big deal. Like, it's there. You just didn't notice it. So it's not a big deal. Yeah.
Right.
This is what I see. And Maggie's actually in the Last Right series, a Blood and Magic series title. She's got her eyes opened as she goes through. Like, so that's one very big part of her magic journey is learning about the world and learning about other people and learning about people being different from her, and also like learning to see the things that have been traumatic for her as things that other people are dealing with, and in different ways and different kinds of trauma, and learning to have she's on a big journey of learning empathy.
Makes sense.
The last book I have is Feral Tales. It's a collection of published and unpublished stories. So a bunch of them are, there's actually 3 from the same world as the Blood and Magic series. Only one which actually features, let me see. Yeah, only one which actually features the main character, but 2 which feature more peripheral characters. And then on top of that, there's some supernatural thriller set in contemporary time. There's almost a ghost story. There's a fable. There's some of my more literary horror writing.
Cool.
Awesome. But I'm really proud of this one. And you can get all of my books on Amazon or on my website, jenfrankel.com, which actually has links to Amazon. But Feral Tales and I think Lay of Earth and a poetry book I wrote called Moving are all available if you go to Bampot, House of Tea. Yes. They do currently, they're exclusively carrying my work. It's also where I host an open mic twice a month and bring in as many diverse kind of writers and performers that I possibly can, and we entertain the people for a couple hours. And I make some really off-color jokes, and usually tell at least one very embarrassing story about myself. So.
Oh, nice.
You can actually catch it. It's called Right On Right Now, like with WRITE. Find us on Facebook, and if you do find us, you can watch videos of the previous events. We have all those streaming, and you will hear those embarrassing stories. Yeah, I know. There's something kind of glorious. I know we're going to talk about comedy and horror comedy, but there's something kind of glorious about like setting yourself up for mockery. There's just some I don't know. I enjoy
self-deprecation.
Yeah. Well, especially when you can co-opt other people to deprecate you. But roast with permission.
Yeah, exactly.
I wrote a piece about being afraid of being bullied in high school. So the moment I got the sense that I might be bullied, I started to invite bullying, so that it was kind of on my terms. It's kind of twisted. But yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing. I have stories in a bunch of different anthologies. I don't have a couple of them. Again, they're available on Amazon. One of them is called Futuristic Canada, published by Dark Helix Press. So I've got a story in that one. It's like a sci-fi about an American who has defected to Canada while on a press junket, and is kind of apologizing to Canadians in. It's kind of a funny piece. Cool. I also was part of this from Pop Seagull Press. It's Robotica, the real relationships of artificial life forms. It's a light erotica book. So I wrote a story for that. Again, that's available on Amazon, and it's highly recommended. There's some great stories in there. Awesome. I was part of Canadian Dreadful, which is specifically a horror anthology. And all of them had to be set in a recognizable location in Canada. So that was kind of a fun thing to do. Mine's set in Nova Scotia around Halifax.
Nice.
And has tie into events that people may have heard of in Halifax.
Oh, okay. Leave it at that.
And then the final book that I have out right now is called Trump, Utopia or Dystopia. It's speculative. I actually edited this. I don't have a story in it, but it's speculative fiction from authors around the world. We had people from as far away as Egypt, and I think we had an Indian writer.
Cool.
A lot of amazing stories and some poetry as well, all inspired by the presidency of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And none of it as horrifying as the real thing. That could get me in trouble too. Yeah. Anyway, and one of the writers from this book actually was she wrote basically feminist sci-fi, radical feminist science fiction. So she was so excited by what she'd been doing for us, I guess, that she's written an entire book that I just finished editing too.
Awesome.
And I cannot remember the title because it's very long and very complicated and kind of funny, but I will learn the title eventually. When the book finally comes out, I will actually learn the title so I can,
yeah, makes sense.
But it's all feminist sci-fi inspired by current events.
Cool. Cool. Well,
and then of course there's my novel Undead Redhead, which was for a wonderful brief flash in the pan, an Amazon bestseller. We did some promoting of it in 3 different categories. So I was actually ranking pretty high in I think satire. Nice. And horror satire, or yeah, I think that those were or like literary.
That sounds
horror.
About right.
Yeah, and movie tie-in, because we've been trying to get it made as a film for quite a while.
Cool.
So we actually ranked pretty high in movie tie-in, and we knocked Julian Fellows off the top spot for
nice.
Yeah. So there you go, Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
So, Undead Redhead is my take on zombies. I tend to shy away from anything that is traditional or that has a like kind of an understanding, like vampires or zombies, or I like to create my own characters that are more of a response to the world and that rely less on other people's creations. So when I do go into things that have a track record, like creatures that have a track record, so to speak, I like to screw them with them. So I did my one and only superhero story is actually in the Feral Tales anthology. It's called The Inner Life of Owl Woman. And it's a take on a superhero who lives in Toronto, and she actually patrols Parkdale. Okay. One of her early mistakes was stopping a man she didn't realize he was jogging. So she realized that she was guilty of racial profiling very quickly. And figured things out after that a little bit better. But she's part of a Canadian superhero team called the CN Force, who are known for their lack of property damage.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's unlike most other superheroes we always see in Marvel movies, etc. That's nice. That's much more polite.
Collateral damage.
Yeah.
Innocent civilians killed. Are you guys kidding? Like, just let the bad guy get away and find him later. Like, seriously, dudes. So she's also like one of the small number of female superheroes in basically what's a boys' club. So she's kind of dealing with that too, and she ends up forming a really close friendship with a supervillainess because they have a lot more in common than otherwise. And I wanted it to be my only superhero story, so I kind of threw everything that I wanted to say about superheroes into one story.
Right.
And that's what I did with Undead Redhead too. That was my segue. Undead Redhead is about a vegan zombie who's not only sentient but is still vegan, despite the fact that she has cravings for meat. But she finds that she can make do with spoiled couscous, rotten fruit and veg, Wine is okay because I guess the grapes have been through a
Everything's
desiccating
old.
process.
Yeah.
Pickles, good. Yeah. So she has to work out the new rules. And she
Yeah.
doesn't know that much about traditional zombies either. So she gets a bit of an education from a comic book guy that she ends up kind of falling for.
Oh,
And he's got a thing for redheads, but he's never been with an undead one.
yeah,
So
because,
it's kind of a zombie comedy romance.
nice.
I think it's very sweet. I'm really, I really enjoy it. It's got a lot of, if you like a lot of kind of weaving plots too, it's got a lot of different characters popping in and out, and their stories interweave with hers. And yeah,
Nice.
so Undead Redhead. Yeah. The executive producer is George Mahalka, who was the director of the original My Bloody Valentine, and a really wonderful guy. And his wife Susan Curran is she's like an amazing marketer. She's done marketing for films and for music for like
nice.
her whole career, and she's extraordinary.
Very
And they make an amazing team. So
awesome.
Yeah, so if anything does happen, I will keep you guys up on it. But
cool. Yeah, please.
It's basically set in Kensington Market. Like it's
Nice.
just it's absolutely quintessentially Canadian Toronto.
Yeah.
And a polite zombie. So there you go.
Polite zombie, yeah, polite vegan zombie. Yes.
Always think about the Tin Woodman, because one of the things that you love about the Tin Woodman in The Wizard of Oz is that he doesn't have a heart, so he's extra careful to make sure he doesn't hurt anybody.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's kind of the same with her. She wants to eat people, so she has to be extra sure not to.
Yeah. You'd think that'd be an easy thing, but not if you're a zombie.
Anybody who's ever had chocolate in their house when they're trying to lose a bit of weight, or we know what temptation is like.
Yep, indeed. Awesome. Okay, now I would like you to talk a little bit about your blog, podcast, music before we move on to my questions that I ask all of my 13 Horrifically Silly Days of Halloween guests.
So, yeah, I do a certain amount of music. I've been I wrote a musical with a friend years ago that ended up at the Rhubarb Festival in Toronto. Only time I've ever done the Rhubarb, and I was too young to know how freaking cool that was. I also have been doing a lot more directing. One of the reasons I moved to Hamilton was actually because I was doing more theater here than I was doing in Toronto for years. And then, of course, as soon as I moved here, I ended up doing more theater in Toronto as well. So I did a really wonderful festival outside of Guelph just before COVID,
right?
Called Dark Crop.
Ooh.
That takes place in a field, so it's all short plays in a field outside under the stars. It takes place over one night. We got rained so hard, and we ended up doing our piece at a time we didn't expect, without costumes and with just a lot of issues, but it was really fun. And I did a monologue for that about that I've actually done a couple of times since in different shows, where I pretend that I'm actually part of the crew and that the show has been delayed, and I'm there to just keep them company while we work out the technical issues. And then I reveal that I've actually poisoned one of the members of the audience, and I was here to kill one of them, and you don't know which one it is. So have a great time. Yeah. I think it's because I knew about bouffant clowning, where the French clowns who want to kill the audience. It just seemed like a natural progression to me somehow.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I've got a SoundCloud, with some of my music up on SoundCloud, Jen Frankel, easy to find. And also there you can find my podcast, which it lasted one season and one episode, and I had this great plan for going on further, and I just I think partly with moving and global pandemic, despite the fact that, it would have been so easy to stay online and do things while I was, trapped in the house. But for some reason, other things just seem to intervene. So it's called Jen Frankel Reads Random Shit.
Mm-hmm.
Shit is spelled with as S hashtag IT.
Mm-hmm.
But which it has its own problems. But yeah, Jen Frankel Reads Random Shit. So it was me. The first season is mostly me reading something from my work and using it to illustrate some form of writing. So whether it's the use of imagery or poetry, or I did one on lyrics, writing song lyrics.
Oh, cool.
So it's a little bit all over the place. It's kind of fun. And then the second season started with an interview with Kit Davin, who's a wonderful Canadian sci-fi author from Cambridge, and sci-fi fantasy. And I was really pumped about the idea of doing more of these, where I'd actually get to talk to other authors and talk about their process. And I find it endlessly fascinating talking about writing with other writers.
Cool.
And I'm hoping that other people will find it interesting to listen to us.
Certainly some, yes.
All over the place. And yeah, so that was a really fun episode. And then maybe I'll get back to it sometime.
Yeah, I can wait for you, Yeah. Awesome.
So yes, the SoundCloud is where my music is.
Perfect. What is your favorite horror movie of all time and why?
I'm going to say, I'm sure that there's a lot of them, but I'm going to say that the one that comes to mind is The Conjuring, because it was the first of the ghost investigation movies that really felt true to me. Mm-hmm. That it really unnerved me, and I'm not used to being that frightened by things in an existential way. Like I understand being afraid of a situation that happens in a movie, or the tension, but to actually feel like this was digging into my soul was really exciting. And I really like the Insidious series too.
Yes, yeah, it's quite good, especially the first one, as far as I'm concerned, anyway. Yeah.
Well, I love Lin Shaye, and I really enjoy the fact that Patrick Wilson ends up in both of those, and just, and I'd read about Lorraine and
Ed Warren,
the Warrens before. So when I heard that there was a movie that was about things that they'd done, I was pretty excited about it.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so what about your favorite horror novel or horror author, one or the other, of all time?
My favorite overall horror author is actually Dean Koontz.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and one of my favorites, I was trying to remember it. I think it was Dark Rivers of the Heart, but I'm not sure, because I was reading the description and it doesn't. It was about a young man who's realizing that his father was probably a serial killer.
Okay.
And it keeps making you think it's going into the supernatural realm.
Right.
And it keeps fooling you, and it never goes there, but it's actually more horrifying because it just keeps making you think that's what's happening. And then when you find out there's a real world explanation, it ends up being far more terrifying than it would have been if it was supernatural. Nice. And it was just a really brilliant book. He's a lot like Stephen King, in that some of the books are just so well fleshed out, and some of them it's like he got the idea and he's like, yeah, fabulous idea, don't really have time to flesh it out, so I'm just going to write it as fast as I possibly can. And you read those ones and you're not so. But he wrote Odd Thomas too, and I adore that book. It's such a sweet story, and I think it's his favorite. I actually wrote him a letter when I was really feeling down and depressed about writing, and just not sure if I could even go on with it. And I wrote him this long handwritten letter, because I know that he doesn't even do email. I don't think he's like I think he types on a typewriter. Yeah, he's super. But he wrote me back a long letter and sent me a copy of Odd Thomas as well. So that was really special for me.
Oh wow, that's awesome. And I remember my stepdad was a huge Dean Koontz fan too, and my mom, but my stepdad in particular was. So that's a very cool answer. Thank you.
And I also love for the classics, I love Shirley Jackson. I love M.R. James. Who tells the best ghost stories, because it's always third person. So it's always like, this is a story I heard about this person, so you don't know if that person's going to make it.
Yeah. Right.
And of course, like Lovecraft, the scariest book I ever read was Beyond the Mountains of Madness, which I read in a bathtub during a power outage, which probably I had to stay in the bathtub till the power came back on because I was too scared to move.
Oh, that's funny.
It was funny. I just have to keep running the cold with the hot water and hoping that it didn't run out.
Yeah. That's funny. All right. Okay. All right. Now, turning to specifically Canadian horror, your favorite Canadian horror movie?
I love The Changeling.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the original ball bouncing down the stairs with nobody throwing it movie.
Yep.
George C. Scott. It is freaking unnerving. It is a wonderful, wonderful piece. And it's there's so many movies that have borrowed from it over the years that I just feel like that, again, that's just an important piece. So I actually have a cheat sheet.
Oh yeah, no problem.
And I do consider American Psycho a Canadian movie because Mary Herron is the director, and Mary Herron is amazing. I mean, everything she does is just so freaking wonderful. But the American Psycho, and that's up there for horror comedies too.
Yeah, dark but funny.
Very dark.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so those are two of my favorites, and then like other it's funny, there's a lot of really classic ones that I like. I know that a lot of people talk about like Ginger Snaps and Cube and a bunch of the other. I didn't really get excited about those so much as definitely My Bloody Valentine. That's just such a classic. And another one of my favorites from around that era is Black Christmas, and Margot Kidder and the absolutely adorable Lynn Griffin, who's in everything Canadian, is just like the most wonderful, like somebody who actually met at a horror festival and got to know. Just so good. And I love the remake of it too, where they actually empowered the girls, and yeah, it's fun. It's like, it's wonderful watching a movie kind of come of age in another era.
Yeah. Interesting point. Cool. All right. And sticking with Canadian, so what about Canadian author or novel?
I love there's a children's author, Welwyn Winton Katz, who actually came from my hometown, and she's written a lot of really wonderful award-winning novels. One of them was an Arthurian fantasy where kids go back in time to from Tintagel, I think, from Cornwall Coast, and where King Arthur was born. So like not specifically horror, but does have some scary elements. But she wrote one called False Face that was just wonderful and won a lot of book awards. So I really love her. And I really enjoyed Nancy Baker, and then there's another Nancy Kilpatrick that I met at a convention and realized we'd both been in an anthology together, in a magazine together, when I was like, it was literally my first professional sale. We were in the same issue of a magazine together.
Nice.
And she's like, she's amazing. Yeah, and it's always like the women of horror in Canada that really stimulate me. I actually met Kelly Armstrong before I knew anything about her, and I think I might have pissed her off a little bit by not knowing who she was. She seemed really nice up until I admitted I didn't know who she was. It was just before Bitten came out as a TV series too. So
right.
Yeah.
Oops. Oh wow.
And I do mean to. I'm pretty excited to read the women of, I can't remember what they're called. All the supernatural women series that she does.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, with all the witchy women. But it's So I'm still gonna get around to it. It's on my reading list. But,
yeah. Cool.
And then I'll have something to say for the next time I meet her.
It's not everybody can know everybody. It's just
I feel like I'm really undereducated when it comes to Canadian authors too, because we don't really celebrate the genre authors. We unless like Andrew Piper, they were initially a literary author. Yeah. And then despite the fact that they're not writing the literature anymore, they're like totally like immersed in genre, they're still treated like a literary author because they started there, and they can have a New York Times bestseller and still be talked about in Canada. Which is kind of the opposite of usual. So yeah, it's a funny country for that. We need to support. We need
It
to
is.
support them.
It's a funny country as far as support in. You can talk about something differently funny, we'll just say, in each of the branches of the arts as far as Canada goes. But that's a whole big other discussion and complaint that we'll just set aside.
Well, not only that, but I've been having the same conversation since I was like first aware of the Canadian system. So
Me too.
obviously nothing has changed in
No,
all the decades since
not
then.
enough, or not, yeah, not a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
I've I feel like Canadian music has had
Yeah.
it has done better, but maybe than the other. And I'm generalizing big time here because it's not like I've studied this, but yeah, no, I still feel like film and television, there have been improvements, but we're still kind of stuck in some of the same spots. And literature, yeah, for sure.
Well, just the idea that Margaret Atwood is our only recognized sci-fi author besides William Gibson, who isn't really Canadian, but we claim him because I guess he lived here for a bit. Like,
Yeah,
it seems a little bit
eye
yeah.
roll. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah. And Malcolm Lowry, who apparently spent like a summer on the beach in Vancouver, so some people can claim
that
he's a
counts.
Canadian author. Under the volcano, like yeah, big literature guy. Big literature. Yeah. So anyway, yes. So yes, I can't remember what we're talking about.
Oh, well,
Many authors, yay!
Yay! I'm going to move on to the next thing anyway. Okay, so favorite horror comedies. Do you have any that are Canadian, international, movies, or books? Either way.
I freaking adore the Scream series, and I know that that's a pretty a pretty easy one to go to, but I love them. And the parody of paranormal activity that the oh, I can't remember. So it's the other. It's a series that was making fun of Scary Movie, but
yeah,
but it was like you're making fun of a comedy, like you're. So it felt
meta.
They were like not necessarily the strongest movies, but the last one, and they've all got Anna Faris in them. So like, how can you not enjoy that? But the one that they did that was making fun of Paranormal Activity and Black Swan and Mother, and that there was a great crop of movies for fodder that time. And it's not really funny per se, but it's definitely got a bit of an ironic tilt to it. The new series Slasher. I mean, it's in its third season now, but it's Canadian. It's Shaftesbury. It's the same guys who do Murdoch Mysteries.
Oh,
but it just feels so different. It feels, I would say it feels American. It just feels real. Like there's a lot of Canadian television that just feels like Canadian television. This is beautifully directed. It's they're using they're using some American stars, but for the most part, there's all these Canadian faces you're used to, but they're doing such interesting shows. They're just like Mako Nguyen from Regenesis.
Yeah.
Steve Byers from Falcon Beach is like is in the first season, and it's the first season is all built around Katie McGrath from Merlin,
right?
And I think she's on Arrow now, or one of those. She's on one of the on one of the DC shows anyway,
right?
Yeah, but it's wonderful. The writing is so good, and it's Canadian. It's like legitimately 100% really Canadian. Each of the seasons kind of takes on a different kind of slasher film. So the first one is like Murder in a Small Town, like basically kind of a Scream thing where people were killed a long time ago, and
and then there's
still
resurgence.
There's still like echoes from that coming down, and the last one is more of a kind of teen thing where it's all the members of a apartment building are being knocked off, and I think the second season is like a summer campy kind of thing, but I'll have to see. Cool. But yeah, kind of like Fear Street, which was great too, the Fear Street series that came out this recently. Yeah, Forever Night was kind of seminal for Grey Wynn Davies and John Kapelos was the sidekick.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah,
who also was from my hometown. Like all these guys. My dad is actually just like a year behind him in school, or a year or two behind him, and it was the same. I think David Suzuki was in that class, and like
Ah,
David Peterson, for like future Premier of Ontario. Like
mhm.
it was a crazy time to be at that high school. Oh, and Victor
Wow,
Garber was there around the same time. All
cool.
at Central High School in London, Ontario. But I love John Kapelos. People don't know, people can't place him. He was the janitor in the original Breakfast Club.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's, yeah. And
Yeah.
he's always just been such a solid, fun actor.
Totally.
But yeah, so Forever Night, definitely important.
Absolutely. Canadian genre horror.
And I even get excited about watching Good Witch, because
Oh, oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
the woman who starred in Forever Night is in that. She plays the mayor, and I
Right.
just always loved her so much.
Yeah.
The Dead Zone was actually Canadian.
The movie.
Both.
Both. Right. Right.
but
Niagara on the
the,
Lake for the movie and the series too.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. And I love that. So yeah, and Nicole De Beers was in that, from like, she's a Canadian actress.
Yeah.
Yeah, and who knew that that Anthony Michael Hall was going to grow up so cute?
Yeah, I know, right? Especially thinking back to the Breakfast Club there, and yeah.
So
You never know.
loved that series. I wish it had gone on like for years longer. And then there's actually, I think Midnight Mass is actually nominally Canadian as well.
Okay.
It's kind of set in I think it's set off the coast, like on a East Coast American town, but it's so Canadian, like it so feels like something in like Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia, yeah.
Really feels like that.
Cool.
And that was a phenomenal series. It's a vampire series where they never mention the word vampire once.
Nice.
Yeah, and it's just such a strong series.
I was just going to switch over now to favorite B movie and why, and favorite, and if there's a favorite Canadian B movie and why.
Black Christmas.
It's going to be a B movie.
Yeah, I would say so. It's just, and you know, even Dead Ringers, I kind of think of as more of a like, yeah. Just,
there's something about that. Yeah, no, they are. Yeah, that's cool. I mean,
especially since, yeah, I think at that time all horror movies were B movies. Like you
kind
didn't
of
have real big blockbuster.
Everybody has a different definition. I've said this over and over again in this series. A different definition of B movie anyway. So it's very open, and that's totally allowed. So that's
anything
cool.
that Tom Cruise didn't star in.
Yeah.
Well, and then there's ones that just, you know, didn't that were like acclaimed but kind of came to it late, like even think like The Others it was big stars, but it was kind of like to the side of mainstream for a while, and that was just such a creepy, wonderful film.
That's true.
And one of my favorites, you really can't call this a B movie except that it was made for kids, was Watcher in the Woods.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
David McCallum, like Ducky from NCIS, and who's like such a fine British actor, and it was one of Betty Davis's last films.
Yeah, right.
And she's terrifying.
Yeah, she is.
Terrifying, and she isn't even the scary person in the movie, but it was the movie that made me afraid of mirrors. You know, it was the first one I'd ever seen, the looking in the mirror, somebody's behind you, you look around, and yeah, I was scared of mirrors for like years after. I saw it on a plane too, like cruising over the Atlantic Ocean. So
okay, so yeah,
I was
extra
young,
tension.
it was middle of the night, everyone was asleep around me, or were they dead?
Exactly.
Circumstance. And the other one that really scared the hell out of me, and again, it's not really a B movie, but Nightmare on Elm Street was terrifying to me.
Yeah.
And
one of my faves when I was young.
Schlocky, but so wonderfully shot.
Yeah. I mean, you could even stray into horror comedy there because of Freddy Krueger's shtick, basically. Yeah. Love it though.
And I've heard that Robert Englund is just like the nicest man ever. So it kind of makes it better in a way.
Totally.
Winchester.
Oh yeah.
Haunted House, because it's based on a true story.
Yeah.
Loved The Ruins, which is kind of like almost an environmental about a hill that has vegetation on it that kind of eats people.
Ooh,
It's freaking super it's so psychological. It's great.
very cool.
Love the series A Haunting for, kind of the documentary
Uh-huh.
aspect.
Yep.
Scares the hell out of me sometimes. Eyes of Laura Mars is one of my favorite all-time movies and very scary whenever I've watched it. And Clove Hitch Killer, which is recent, but it's Dylan McDermott playing a serial killer, like playing the most realistic serial killer I've ever seen.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I was thinking that in a way, most of my favorite horror movies don't have rewatch value because there's some kind of twist or scary part that gets you the first time, but won't necessarily get you again.
Mhm.
And the only rewatch value is in watching somebody else watching them.
Right.
So
What is your Halloween ritual?
I used to be very proud of the fact that I always dressed up.
Mhm.
And I am devastated to admit that the last 4 or 5 years, I have not gone all out. I love the dressing up part of it. Dressing up and going out is my thing.
Mhm.
I'm not as much a stay at home and give out candy person.
Yeah.
If I'm going to give out candy, I'm going to take it to the bar kind of person.
Right.
I love Halloween parties. I love seeing what other people are dressed up as. That is 100% my ritual.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jen, for talking to me today and for talking about yourself, your books, and all your Halloween and horror favorites.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.